which is something that should bring me joy, right? Something that should excite me because I get to do this every day. When I start to feel that, I know it's time for me to take time for myself, and I will push a day aside, write a song, work in the shop, build something, whatever that is. Find what yours is and just do it, because this job, this hobby is far too cool to get burnt out on. Hey everybody, Resident Loser Jeremy here, and today I want to talk about something we use all the time in the studio that's kind of like a muscle, that if we don't flex it, just like any other muscle, it's going to go away, and that's creativity. If you're anything like me, your background was as a musician, playing in bands, playing whatever, but for me it was the frustration of never kind of getting what I wanted, and the cool romance that surrounded the studio. I mean, I'm a gearhead, so this is just the natural progression of things for me. But ultimately what got me here was being a musician and being a creative individual first. And it seems strange to talk about it like this, but if you're coming at this from like an engineer producer standpoint, that's a muscle you constantly have to flex. And sometimes you don't really get to flex it. This is all about kind of give and take with the different artists that we work with. Some artists that you work with in some bands will let you produce without limits, create the vision that's in your head for the band or group or artists that you're working with. That's a really good outlet for creative individuals like you watching this video, because the YouTube algorithm brought you here. By the way, smash that like button for that YouTube algorithm. But sometimes we work with bands where we don't get to be creative, and quite the contrary. If you're doing this as a career, or if you're working towards this as a career, something you'll notice is sometimes you have to keep your mouth shut. This isn't your record. This is the band's record. It doesn't really matter if you're happy with it. That is a very oversimplified statement for the whole process of a producer-engineer relationship. In a perfect world, I would love to be stoked with every record that leaves, but that's not the case. As a mid-level studio like myself, where I make a decent living, to do that, I have to take on certain projects that don't always end the way you want to. And sometimes you know it going into it, sometimes you don't. And that's okay. Sometimes you can just be an engineer and then let your mind shift set to more of that scientific, methodological approach to making a record. Because in this sense, you're not the producer. You're just trying to make the best sounds you can. And sometimes that happens. But if you're anything like me, you were a creative individual to start with. For myself, over the last 10 years of running this studio, I have learned that I need to take time to flex kind of that creative side of me. It doesn't even have to be anything crazy. If I can get something into a track that is really inspiring me, that's great. That does it for me. But if I have a long stretch of records where maybe I'm just mastering or doing mixes that I had no part in production, and there's definitely some creativity that happens there, but you have to stoke that side of you to keep you going. If that's where you started and that's what got you here, that's what's going to keep you going, and you need to keep that fire burning and that muscle flexed for you, because ultimately that's why you started getting gigs. Why people are wanting to come to you to record, because your past work was impressive, or they liked what you did on so-and-so's record, and that reflects on your creative tendencies as a producer. So if you have a stretch where you're not being able to do this, and newsflash, it's gonna happen at some point, I find for myself, I need to take some time, even if it's a few hours out of a day, to make something. Woodworking, if it's building desks like the one I have built back here, if it's building a bass trap, whatever, I like to do some woodworking. But more often, I need to sit down and just write. Come up with something on the guitar, come up with something on the piano, and just flesh out an idea. Nobody even has to hear it. Nobody has to know it ever existed. And oftentimes nobody does. I just pop them in my personal Dropbox folder and listen to them every once in a while for fun. Sometimes they end up in these videos, but it keeps me feeling like I am tapped into that creative side. And above all that, when you're kind of in the creative flow, it makes you look at your equipment a little differently than if you were just working to mix or master or produce a band, because now you're looking at your equipment from a creative standpoint, and now I can realize I can use these Neve 1073s as fuzz pedals, or I can run preamp compressor option on this instrument and it sounds really, really cool. You kind of cast out all the rules, even more so than in a typical situation. And I think you'll be surprised with what you can come up with if you approach it from that way. And even if you work inside the box, approaching your plugins with kind of that same no rules mentality and just trying to be creative and stay in a flow state for yourself, not even as an exercise, but teaching yourself to do this almost as a form of meditation for us is really important, because it gets us snapped back into why we started. And doing this will kind of give you back a few things. You can approach different projects in an appropriate manner. When you need to be creative, you've been practicing, so you have all these interesting ideas that you can pull out really, really fast, because in the studio, time is money, right? But on the flip side of that, when you have to just be an engineer and you only have to think technically, you can do that because the other part of you has been satisfied. It can be really soul crushing. If you were to take me out of this world and put me behind a desk and tell me I had to do administration things all the time, I could do it, but very, very quickly that would become soul crushing. And what's interesting about this type of work and what we do, we have to be tapped into a creative side. We have to be tapped into something else that is just showing up for work. There has to be something else that drives you other than getting paid for this session or getting paid for this mix or getting paid for this master. And sure, you can make a living doing that, but really, really quickly, you're gonna hate it. And coming from somebody who's kind of slipped into that a few times, find yourself a hobby. And for some people, if you were a straight musician before, give yourself time to write some music. If you have other hobbies, I know there's a lot of engineers. I don't know why this is kind of the common theme with some of us, but we love woodworking. Obviously, be careful with your fingers. I managed to chop the tips of these two guys off. Couldn't play guitar for about a year. That was a long, long time ago. I'm better now. Find some hobby that is not in this world of recording and music and production, if you can. If playing music is what satisfies that for you, or restoring instruments, or whatever, get out of this mindset for a little bit. Let yourself reset. Let yourself become refreshed, and you'll be better for yourself, any potential client you'll work with, and your work in general. If you can keep this mentality of this job is awesome, this hobby is awesome, I love it, without burning yourself out, as with any job, that's what makes a dream job. If you can do what you love and you can do it all the time, then you'll never work a day in your life. But just as with everything else, there's a balance. There's a work-life balance. And if all you do is approach this as work, you'll never have fun doing this. All that to say, I felt myself getting into those types of situations fairly often, and I know when I start to feel like some disdain for having to do another bounce or having to rework this mix for the 100th time, which is something that should bring me joy, right? Something that should excite me because I get to do this every day. When I start to feel that, I know it's time for me to take time for myself, and I will push a day aside and just reset my clock, write a song, work in the shop, build something, whatever that is. Find what yours is and just do it, because this job, this hobby is far too cool to get burnt out on. Anyway, guys, if you like this one, hit the like button. If you want to subscribe, I talk like this all the time. I do little rants, I do little one mic experiments, and I give stuff away every once in a while. So go check that out on my store, download an impulse or two. There's a couple free ones there, and there's some drum samples and bass cab impulses if that's what you're into. Go check it out. Either way, guys, I'm Resident Loser Jeremy. I'll see you in the next one.